Rebekah Roth here again, and I'd like to share with you one of the most interesting stories surrounding 9/11. It's kind of in the lead-in to 9/11, and it wraps up a lot of different details. But it includes one of the accused hijackers named Khalid al-Mihdhar. Khalid lived with his wife in her father's home in Yemen. Now, the interesting thing about this is his father-in-law fought for the Central Intelligence Agency's Mujahideen in the Afghanistan war. After that war ended, he returned to Yemen with his family. Everything was totally normal. And since either 1996 or 1998, the NSA and the CIA had that house and the phones inside tapped. There's no explanation to how they managed to get the phones tapped or to get the house bugged, but the US government obviously had to have an agent involved with him on the inside. His name was Mr. Al-Hada, H-A-D-A. So long before 9/11, 5 to 7 years before that, Khalid al-Mihdhar's phone had been tapped. The CIA and the FBI claimed that the house was an Al-Qaeda communications hub. They captured some calls from Osama bin Laden using his satellite phone. And in December of '99, we are told by the government that Khalid made plans to travel to Kuala Lumpur. The CIA says that it was to attend a big Al-Qaeda meeting, a summit of Al-Qaeda members, terrorist summit. Lots of men they claimed were terrorists and Osama bin Laden associates supposedly were in attendance. Now, en route to Kuala Lumpur, Khalid spent the night in Dubai at a hotel. The CIA claims that they broke into his hotel room. They copied his passport and a multiple entry visa into the United States, and they quickly sent those documents to the joint CIA-FBI task force, or the Osama bin Laden unit known as the Alex Station. Khalid went to Kuala Lumpur, where the CIA had him monitored, along with the other men there, by the local intelligence agency that took pictures and shared them with the CIA. After a week or so, Khalid and Nawaf al-Hazmi traveled to Bangkok, and after some time enjoying Bangkok, they boarded a United Airlines flight to Los Angeles, California. You're probably wondering now why the CIA lost interest in these two Al-Qaeda terrorists when they boarded this United flight, right? I was wondering the same thing myself. But it appears there might be a reason for their sudden lack of interest in these two Middle East terrorists that they'd been following. Now remember, the CIA was monitoring this guy's phone. They broke into his hotel room, copied his paperwork, maybe even saw he was going to Los Angeles while he was in Dubai. So that tells you that they were keeping a very close tab on Khalid al-Mihdhar. So why all of a sudden the total lack of interest? Well, let's travel back in time, because we really have to October 12th, 2000. The USS Cole was attacked while at port in Aden, Yemen. And much of the internet has been scrubbed, but initially, and I actually found this in some printed books, the Yemeni government claimed that Khalid al-Mihdhar was in fact in Yemen before, during, and after that attack, and he was considered a perpetrator. The FBI immediately went to Yemen, and within about a month, they were asked to leave by the U.S. ambassador to Yemen, who was blocking their investigation. There'll be more on that later, too. Well, here's an interesting part. Back in 2021 or thereabouts, a tape-recorded phone call was released by the new government of Yemen, a call between George Tenet, the CIA director, and President Saleh of Yemen. The call was made in 2001. I actually found the date. In that recording, George Tenet is heard pressuring President Saleh to release a detained individual that was involved in the USS Cole bombing. Well, you heard that right. George Tenet was demanding a terrorist be released. When President Saleh asked him for the name, George Tenet said, quote, "I don't want to give his name over the phone." I guess that means they listen. Then Tenet said this is my person. This is my problem. This is my issue. The man must be released. I've talked to everyone in my government, and I told them that I was going to make this call. This man in question must be released within 48 hours. President Saleh then said to Tenet, "The FBI team has just returned from Aden to Sana'a. Is it possible that you could send them here to tell me the person's name?" And as far as I know, as far as it goes, the name was never transferred to the FBI or to President Saleh. I eventually found a newspaper article that actually gave the date of this phone call. Considering the date change and all, time change, the FBI had just arrived in Sana'a on June 4th, 2001. Now here's where I think it gets really kind of crazy. By June 2001, and from the October 2000 attack on the Cole, until June of 2001, no one was reported to have been detained or arrested over the USS Cole bombing. But in the Terror Timeline book by Paul Thompson on page 83, the Yemen government, including President Saleh, claimed that Khalid al-Mihdhar was in fact in Yemen before, during, and for some time after the attack. I found it really intriguing that the president of Yemen would know Khalid al-Mihdhar by name. Or did he assume that George Tenet knew Khalid al-Mihdhar by name? Now that's a thought. No timeline is given, but no arrests were ever made public that I can find, and I have searched for hours online, including using AI. No one was arrested or charged until 2003, when there was finally an arrest made. So who, is the question, was the USS Cole suspected terrorist bomber that George Tenet, the director of the CIA, was saying was his guy? Well, he was demanding an accused Al-Qaeda terrorist bomber, his guy, to be released. Now, think about that. Is it possible that he was, in fact, referring to Khalid al-Mihdhar? And by the way, al-Mihdhar did go to Saudi Arabia the first part of June, and for some reason he got a new passport. Had he been to another country, maybe Israel or someplace where he got a stamp he needed to get rid of? It's hard to say. But around the 1st of June, he got a new passport and a new visa, and he came back to the United States on July 4th, 2001, just 2 months before the 9/11 so-called terror event. Well, there is more to this story. And it indicates that the Cole bombing actually might have been not a terrorist attack at all. As I was reading every book I could find about spies and intelligence networks and terrorists and all of the espionage, all of that stuff. I read a book by an Egyptian intelligence officer that was associated with the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. And his name was Imad Salem, and in his book titled Undercover, I learned that he had moved to New York in roughly 1987 and soon became an FBI informant. And then he became an FBI asset, hired to infiltrate the mosque where the blind sheikh, if you're old enough to remember him, spoke to his followers in New Jersey, New York area. The blind sheikh, according to Imad Salem, the Egyptian intel officer turned FBI asset, was under the protection of the Central Intelligence Agency, as he had been instrumental in recruiting Muslims for the CIA war against the Soviet Union in Afghanistan in 1979 through 1989 in that war. Kind of a proxy war. Imad Salem did infiltrate the group from the blind sheikh's mosque, and then he apparently riled them up and encouraged them to build a bomb. After he had bragged to them that he was somewhat of a bomb-making expert and convinced them that they should blow something up, long story short, Imad refused to take a polygraph test because he was suspected of working for a foreign intelligence agency. The FBI wanted him to take a polygraph test. He refused. He got bent out of shape, and they dismissed him. About 6 months later, the bomb that he claims in his book and on tape that he built under FBI supervision went off in the basement of the World Trade Center tower. February 26, 1993, I think it was. Digging a little deeper than his book, I discovered that the young 20-year-old kid that the FBI claimed had rented the van used in that incident was such a bad driver that he likely had no insurance and no driver's license. Pretty hard to rent a Ryder truck without both of those items. But according to some sources that I found online, it was actually Imad Salem that rented the van and used the kid's name. But the crazy part of this story is the address and the phone number that Imad Salem used on the rental forms. The address and phone number belonged to a woman that was renting a room out to the younger man. His name was Salome. And he did occasional handyman type work for her. She was roughly 50, he was in his 20s. And she requested that he rent a van to do a particular job the following day. And once the van was rented, he apparently, this was done with Imad Salem's assistance, of course, he apparently asked if he could use the van to take a few of his friends to the grocery store. They went into the grocery store, and when they came out with their groceries, the van was missing. It wasn't where he had left it. He called the police, and he reported it stolen. And the following day, the van showed up involved in the World Trade Center bombing, when an FBI guy almost immediately found one piece of that truck or van, it was an Econoline van, I believe, with a VIN number stamped onto it. They quickly traced that van back to the rental place in New Jersey and to Mr. Salome. And when they went to the address that was listed on the rental agreement, they discovered that the apartment listed belonged actually to a woman who was a known Mossad agent. Her name was Josie Hadass. I managed to find several stories in the New York Times, Newsweek, and Time magazine actually listing her name in several details. They found explosive residue and wires, etc., etc. But when the FBI was asked about this known Mossad agent or asset by the FBI on the scene, they brushed her off with a question, sassily kind of replied, something to the effect of, well, if she was Mossad, we wouldn't tell you. So now here's what we have. We have an Egyptian intelligence guy who admits in his own book and on tapes that he made of his FBI handlers, he had an insurance policy, he taped everything they said, that he had built the bomb under FBI supervision. He rents the van used in the World Trade Center bombing, and he uses an address of an Israeli Mossad agent's home and her phone number. Now, it does seem rather odd that this Muslim man, this young gentleman, who we're assuming is a terrorist, or we're told is so connected to the Israeli intelligence agent. He's living in her home. And then we have the FBI showing absolutely no interest in finding her. Maybe they knew she'd already left the country. She couldn't be expedited out of Israel. And Imad Salem later sets up the blind sheikh, along with a group of men from that mosque, in another bomb plot of his making. And they all go to prison. Imad himself, he goes into witness protection on our dime. After all that good work he's done, he set up a bunch of Muslim men associated with an Israeli woman. But again, in his book, he writes this: in the summer of 2000, he's still working for some intel agency, whether it's Israel or Egypt. We may never know the truth from him, but let's surmise. In his book, he claimed that Egypt, but it was who called him, but maybe with the connection he has now to the Mossad woman Josie Hadass, well, that tells us that it might not have been Egypt, but he claims that it was Egypt that called him back. And while in Egypt or Israel, he's offered a mission or an assignment to go to Yemen. This is, I think, June of 2000. But he claimed in his book, whoever he was actually talking with or working with refused to allow the United States feds, he called them, the FBI, his handlers, in on this mission. They said, no way can the U.S. be brought in on this. Something was about to go down in Yemen. But he refused, and he goes back to New York, and a few months later, he's sitting at home watching television, and lo and behold, the USS Cole explosion happens. And he puts all the pieces together. So whichever intelligence agency he was working for, whether it was Egypt or Israel or both, it seems that someone knew the plot or the plan for the USS Cole months in advance, at least 3. The USS Cole story is now beginning to look a lot like an intelligence operation. So back now to the phone call between the CIA Director George Tenet and President Saleh of Yemen. Nobody had been arrested for the USS Cole bombing, and Saleh claimed it was an Israeli operation. Since Khalid al-Mihdhar was on the CIA's radar, they had his phone tapped, they broke into his hotel room, they followed him to Kuala Lumpur, like they have nothing else to do. And then they completely lost all interest in him once he boarded United Airlines for Los Angeles, California. Could it be that Khalid al-Mihdhar was in fact Tenet's terrorist bomber of the USS Cole? He's been blamed for it. And that he was needed to play some role in the 9/11 event? Because believe it or not, Khalid al-Mihdhar has been reported still alive by the media, both in the United States and foreign media. Later in another video, I'll go into the connections between Oklahoma, the University of Oklahoma, George Tenet, his mentor David Boren, and who was the president of the university, and the CIA station chief of Berlin, who was claimed that he was surveilling the now famous Hamburg cell. And I'll tell you about a document from British intelligence that tells, in fact, that it was Israel's Mossad that was not only running, but controlling that now famous Hamburg cell that we were told Mohammed Atta, Marwan al-Shihi, and Ziad Jarrah were supposedly operating in. So keep your seatbelts fastened. This story seems to have no end to the fascinating connections between terrorists and our own government, along with our favorite ally in the Middle East. I'm sure you know who I'm referring to.